What's your best true spooky story? Story 1. The scariest thing I've had happen while camping. So I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer, and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1 hour drive from her city to the coast. We ended up at this free campsite at the top of a hill, huge foothills of the coastal mountains, about a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road was. And we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. A truck full of men drove up the hill and talked with my mom. I don't know what about, it wasn't suspicious at the time, and then they left us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I woke up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I wake easily, so I heard her gasp, and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what was wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden you could hear footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully, my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, grab the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter, and mind you, he was not there. Just us girls, like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank goodness for my mom. Story 2. I lived in an old apartment in 2002. The place was built in 1900, so it was just over 100 years old when I moved in. The living room and kitchen were fine, but the bathroom and bedroom were unnerving, like I just always felt like I was being watched, especially in the bedroom if the closet door was open. Those unnerving feelings just became moderately uncomfortable as I settled in. I felt safe in the bedroom, but only if the door was locked. One night I was dead asleep when there was a loud bang on my bedroom door. When I got up the courage to get out of bed, I checked the apartment, and all the windows were closed and locked from the inside. The door still had the chain secured. No one was there. I mentioned the closet in the bedroom. I never liked going in there, and I never liked when the door was open. For some reason, in my head, I would hear gasping noises. So for that reason, the closet stayed closed. A month or more after I was woken by the bang on my door, I was dead asleep. But something woke me up, and it was a pressure on me, like being held down. It was pitch black in my room. I couldn't see anything, but I knew someone was standing over me. When I could finally turn on a bedside lamp, no one was there. After that, I couldn't sleep in the dark. I had to sleep with a lamp on. That incident scared the life out of me. And after that, the unnerving feeling of being watched intensified. Friends would come over and comment about being uncomfortable in the bathroom, like being watched. It became so uncomfortable for me that when I had the chance to move to another unit, I jumped at it, I packed up and got out. After me, several people rented the apartment, and they would move out within months. I became friendly with the building manager, and I told him that I felt the place was haunted. He kind of laughed it off. Years later, they were renovating the place. The building manager was doing some painting in there, and the building owner was there too. I went and checked out the apartment, and it looked nicer. It didn't feel as creepy. I got to talking with the building owner, and through the course of conversation, he just threw it out there that a former tenant had taken their own life in the closet by hanging. He also mentioned that the original designer of the building lived in that apartment and passed away there. I wasn't mad when I heard that, but I felt validated that what I experienced was real. Story 3. While at university, my friends and I ran out of drinks. Hardly any shops were open because it was late, so the only option was to walk the mile or so to the nearest 24-hour supermarket. Between the supermarket and the dorms we lived in was just row after row of suburban houses that all looked the same. As we were walking down one road, we passed a field with a large campfire and some people riding horses around it. There were people playing musical instruments and general sounds of a good time going on. The horses and fire and the lanterns which were dotted about gave it a very old-fashioned feel. Maybe 5 minutes after passing the field, now walking past houses again, one of my friends commented on how weird and out of place that gathering of people had been. My other friend and I had been thinking exactly the same thing, so curious, we turned around and walked back to find out exactly what was going on. There was nothing there. Not just no people or horses, there was no field, just more and more houses. Even though we were absolutely certain we were on the right road, as we'd simply turned around, we walked up and down the neighboring roads too. We found nothing. We weren't drunk, though we'd had some drinks, and so I've got absolutely no idea what happened that night. Story 4. 4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the old boys' home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues, but was closed due to allegations of abuse. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night around 1 a.m., I heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend trying to reach down to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around and I was still hearing the voice, but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again, my dog started to whimper at our door, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in bed when someone lies down next to you? Where the bed pushes in and there's warmth at your back? I felt that, so I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over. My boyfriend wasn't in the bed, and I felt the bed release pressure. Whatever was lying next to me had gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room, and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. Story 5. My wife and I stayed at a nice hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. It was where I asked her to marry me after a lovely dinner. I picked the room because it came with a huge Japanese soaking tub that I, a 6 foot 1 inch man, could barely see over the edge of. Anyway, the first night we stayed there, we were sleeping in the single king bed. I believe the alarm clock said it was 2 or 3 a.m. To my left, and just a few feet from me, I heard what sounded like a pencil slowly rolling down a sloped surface. It was so deliberate and loud that it woke us both up. It was also so distinct that, while my heart thumped from the sudden noise, I quickly convinced myself that it was a pencil sliding off the desk in our room, and I went back to sleep. The next morning, to my surprise, I found that A, there were no pencils in the room, and B, there was no desk. It was my first night in the room, so I had assumed that it, like other hotels, had a place to sit and write. Well, that was not the case. The only thing I could find to write with were ballpoint pens with their caps on. They wouldn't make that distinctive, loud noise that a ridged wooden pencil makes as it rolls. Furthermore, there was no sloped surface in the room for anything to suddenly roll off of in the middle of the night. The whole thing was odd enough that we talked about it that morning. I do not believe in ghosts, but to be honest, I'd love to encounter something unexplained. I entertained the idea of a ghost pencil, but knew in my mind there had to be a real explanation. But that's not all that happened. That night we were both in the soaking tub. The water was up to my chin. It was great. We were in the middle of February, a cold and miserable month in Pittsburgh. We were splashing around in the tub having fun, pretending we were rich. And then, from the other room, we heard the buzzing of an old microphone hooked up to a PA system. Basically, that sound of feedback that comes before an announcement. The whole room filled with the buzzing sound of microphone feedback. Our hearts thumped in our chests yet again, and then we both practically jumped out of our own skin. We heard the distinctive sound of someone blowing into a microphone to test it. Wooth, wooth. You could picture it. It was that recognizable, just like the pencil. My heart went from thumping wildly to pounding like a hummingbird's wings. Naked, I leapt from the tub and threw a towel around myself. That was a man blowing into a microphone, I said. My wife stayed in the tub, scared and quiet. I searched our room and did not find a speaker or any kind of speaker grill embedded in a wall or the ceiling. We couldn't find a possible source for the sound other than an iHome speaker that was already playing music from my iPhone. So that was our story. We still had one more night. We were exhilarated by our engagement and the possibility that the hotel might be haunted. A week later, I had the thought to email the hotel. I asked them about their building. Pittsburgh is an old town, and downtown Pittsburgh is a very, very old town. They got back to me and explained, my jaw dropped, that they used to be an old telephone factory. I don't know why I found meaning in that explanation or why it made everything click so well, but my thoughts immediately went to the sounds of a factory, the PA system, the drafting table, all relics from another time in that building's life. Story 6. I'm from Scotland, And when I was a child, my mom and dad took my sister and me on a trip to Fort William, which is a town up in the Highlands. People go there for skiing and hiking. It wasn't winter, so we were there to do some easy hiking. My sister and I were quite young, I was about 11, and to stay for a couple of nights. I can't remember the name of the hotel we stayed at, but I do remember that it was old-fashioned, and we were all in one room together. There was a single bed where I was sleeping, a double bed in the middle, my parents were there, and another single on the other side, my sister's. I was often frightened when I was a girl. I didn't like the dark, and I was very scared of the possibility of ghosts, etc. I never found it easy to sleep because of this, even at home. I vividly remember tossing and turning that first night in the hotel for a long time before lying on my back and trying to calm myself down. I then felt the bed sink a little next to my feet. I heard the creak of the old mattress. Someone was sitting at the foot of my bed. My heart was honestly pounding. I hadn't heard my sister or parents get up, so I was terrified. Whatever was sitting there quickly moved, so it was sitting on my feet. I felt the weight of whatever it was. I heard the mattress creak again. My feet were freezing cold. It then moved off my feet and settled down next to them again. The old mattress shifted and creaked again. Within a second or two, I felt the coldest I've ever felt, but not throughout my whole body. The coldness was slowly rising up from my feet, accompanied by a feeling of pressure. I was too scared to open my eyes. I was willing myself to call for my mom, but I was so scared that I just couldn't at first. When I managed to shout out and wake the rest of my family, the cold, pressured feeling had reached up to my knees. When the lights were switched on, the feeling vanished. I have no explanation for this whole situation. My dad slept in that bed the next night, and I stayed awake the whole night in the double with my mom. Story 7. When I was in high school, my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water, nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6. One day I was sitting in their den on my phone when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple of times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response, I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up, and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car, and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later, I was at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently the previous owners had a child pass away from SIDS in that room upstairs. He's very religious and had a mass said for the child. He said after that, it never happened again. Still gives me chills when I talk about it. Story 8. I came home from work one day to grab my spare tires. My sister was away at school 7 hours away, and neither of my parents were going to be home for another 5 hours at minimum. I ran in, changed my clothes, grabbed my tires, then drove to a garage to get them installed. I got home 2 hours later, and as I walked into the living room, there was a chair just sitting in the middle of the hallway and facing the front door. I thought nothing of it, but didn't recognize the chair as being one that we owned. It was a standard metal folding chair that you would buy for a couple bucks at a retail store. I folded it up and propped it against my dad's workbench in our garage. My mom got home a couple hours later, and I asked her in passing why she left a metal chair in the middle of the hallway. She told me we don't own any metal chairs and that she hadn't been home until an hour ago. I told her I came home, and there was a metal chair just sitting in the middle of the hallway after I had gotten back from the garage. She told me to show her the chair, and when I went out to the garage to show it to her, it was gone. I looked high and low for that metal chair, but couldn't find it. I swore to her that I wasn't on anything and that I wasn't imagining things. She thought what I was telling her was strange, but didn't pay much attention to it. I never saw that chair again, nor do I know where it came from or where it went. Story 9. I'm sure this will get buried, but I've got one. It's more bittersweet spooky than scary spooky, but here goes. My ex had this lamp that she kept on the island in our kitchen. She turned it on pretty much every night and in the mornings to make coffee. It was a solid little lamp. I brought my cat to live with us late in our relationship because she had dogs, and my cat was pretty old and not used to dogs, so I tried to spare her little heart from that shock. She came to love lying in the spot by where that lamp plugged into the outlet on the wall of the island. She passed away soon after I brought her over, and I was absolutely heartbroken. I had a hard time accepting the loss. About a week after my cat passed, my ex was grinding coffee in a little electric grinder, and I heard her shriek from the other room. I rushed over to see what was going on, and she told me she felt something cold pass by her feet. Then the light on the lamp started flickering. She tried to show me again the flickering, but it didn't happen. I just chalked it up to her being weird at 6 a.m. A couple of days later, she asked me to make coffee for her. I grabbed the grinder, flicked on the lamp to see what I was doing, and sure enough, the same thing happened to me. A cold wind whipped past me like a cat running around my feet. Then the light on the lamp flickered before I could even get the grinder going. It never happened before or after, despite the hundreds of times I'd used that grinder in the same outlet as the lamp. I like to think it was my little girl saying goodbye one last time. Storytime. It's not as spooky as some other stories on here, I guess. But my partner and I are still a bit bewildered by it. It's been years, and we still wonder about it occasionally. There's no explanation other than some weird supernatural connection or just a really big coincidence. For about 10 years now, my Nana has been living in a nursing home. She had a stroke, and mentally she is not all there. She still recognizes us when we visit and gets happy to see us, but she often talks gibberish, thinking she's in a distant memory in the past. It makes me sad because she and I always had a very close connection growing up. My parents both worked a lot, and she would stay with me. She used to know when I was lying. She could always sense when I was sick, even when she wasn't over, and she and I are eerily similar, both in personality and looks. There are pictures of her when she was 21, and it could be me in the photo. We were very close growing up, and I love her dearly. I introduced her to my now husband when we started dating in college. He is from a different country than I am, and I live in his country. We had been dating a few years when my visa was going to expire. In order for us to live in one place, we decided to get married. However, we were still young, fresh out of university, and decided to just elope. We decided to get officially married at a courthouse while announcing our engagement, and then have a wedding a few years later. Official documents and wedding ceremonies are separated in my husband's country anyway. No one knew of our plan. We were, and still are, deeply in love and thrilled to have such a crazy secret between us two. In hindsight, it was silly, and no one would have judged us, especially considering we are still happily together years later. But we still decided to hide it because we were just young and nervous. So we flew to visit my parents in my home country and announce our engagement, and my dad picked us up from the airport. We were chatting in the car when he told us that my Nana was freaking out while he visited her the other day, the day we decided to elope. Why was she freaking out? She announced to my whole family that she saw in her dreams that I had eloped and was now married. They dismissed her because they didn't expect that at all. She kept insisting and was incredibly lucid about it. She raised her voice, which she hadn't done since before the stroke. My dad mentioned it because he thought it was sweet that she was so worried and became so clear-headed. My husband and I just got silent in the car, and I went cold. We don't know how she knew that, or if it was just a coincidence, but somehow she knew. We went to visit her a few days later, and she didn't remember it at all. She was thrilled we were engaged. We are happily married now, and had our wedding and everything, and no one ever found out we had eloped before the wedding day, except my Nana, apparently. Story 11. Okay, so this was probably 15-ish years ago now. When I was in high school, my group of friends used to spend a lot of time at a particular friend's house because it was huge. It was also quite an old house, but his parents were cool with us basically taking over when we were there. We'd make dinner for about 10 people, stay up late listening to music and playing video games, and they never minded. Anyway, one evening, we're all sitting in his room watching TV. It's dark and the lights are on, but the curtains are open. Suddenly, two different people on opposite sides of the room jump like they've been startled and look around. Both of them explain they saw, reflected in the window, on the second floor, just FYI, somebody walk across the room. None of us had moved. It freaked a few of the girls out, and we had to calm them down a bit. Flash to a couple of weeks later, and we found a pack of cards in our friend's house that had letters on them. Somebody suggested we could use these as a Ouija board and figure out if our friend's house was actually haunted. We got a big wooden board. I think it might have been the top of a table once upon a time. Arranged the cards in a circle around the edge with an extra 2 homemade yes-no cards, got a glass, and off we went. It started to answer questions, telling us it was a man who used to live in the house and who died there. We asked when he died and just got the answer long. We asked if he was moving the glass, and he said yes. This is where I decided to be dumb, and I asked if he could move anything else other than the glass. Yes. We all paused and listened for the sound of something moving, but nothing happened. We asked if he had moved something. Yes. Nothing happened again, so we moved on and asked some more questions. This was at 10:30 p.m. After a while longer, we said goodbye. I think at least one of us was aware enough about Ouija board lore to know we had to close the conversation properly, and then a little later we all went home, a little spooked but enjoying it nevertheless. I walked home with another friend who lived nearby. As I walked in my front door, my mom called through to me to be careful in my room because a mirror had fallen off the wall earlier, and they weren't sure if they'd picked up all the bits of glass. When I asked when this had happened, she told me, "Oh, about 10:30?" The same time I asked the spirit to move something, I did not sleep well that night. Story 12. I have a tale. This is my parents' story, but it is so good the internet needs it. Sorry for the extreme length. This is like a 2-hour story when my parents tell it. They remember it even more vividly than I could type about it. This is 100% real. If you think otherwise, bugger off. Part 1. Mequon. Back in the 80s, my parents had just gotten married, graduated from college, and had my big brother. They moved into a small house in a very affluent neighborhood north of Milwaukee. The house was surprisingly in their budget. Again, just graduated from college and med school with a little one, but was the smallest on the block. My parents made an offer that was a few under the asking price. 2 other couples offered more than the asking. Bidding war. However, the old man that owned the house rejected both of those offers and said he wanted my folks to have it. He said he and his late wife would have both agreed it was the right thing to do. My folks were super grateful and were extremely excited to be living in the neighborhood. There were many youngsters, so my brother had lots of playtime. Life was very good. Then, things started to go downhill. Part 2, red light. The first thing was with the basement. So during this time, my mom stayed at home with my brother, and my dad was getting his practice started. He worked super late and was only home on Sundays, basically. My mom did laundry in the basement, and one day when she was walking upstairs, a red light at the bottom of the stairs turned on. Now I'm told this is a super bright light, and the switch for it was taken out long ago. It was almost like a fallout shelter emergency light with a cage on it. My mom didn't know what to think, so she starts going downstairs to investigate, and the light turns off. She figures that maybe it was some sort of surge. The next day she goes downstairs again, comes up, the light is on again. Again starts walking down and it turns off. She does not shrug it off this time. She waits a bit at the bottom of the stairs and then walks back upstairs. The light turns on and she runs down this time to catch it, only this time. It starts flashing like a strobe light before she can even reach the bottom. She rushed out of the house so quickly with my brother and didn't go back the rest of the day. The light never turned on for my dad or turned on again after that day. Part 3. Knock knock. After the red light incident, my mom was naturally shaken up. She was scared to go downstairs without my dad. Rightfully so. But there was something that started before the red light, but escalated after knocking. My parents figured this was originally just natural sounds of the house as it was fairly old. It would be very sporadic and very infrequent until one night, my parents were in bed chatting about the day, bills, etc. Then they started hearing knocking. It started in their room under the bed, then on the walls and ceiling. It would be about 30 seconds apart, and they could not find a source. Then it sounded like the knocking was outside their room. So they got up and tried following the sound to find where it was coming from. They went all over the house trying to figure it out. Every time they thought they found the source, it would jump to a different side of the room. They eventually ended up in the foyer/living room and tracked the knocking, super frequent and super loud, to the foyer closet. My mom had a fireplace poker in hand, and my dad had a bat. He crept towards the closet, and as he reached for the doorknobs, a voice called out to them, "Knock, knock." He swung the doors open. There was nothing there, and all the knocking stopped. My parents could do nothing but stare at each other. Neither of them slept that night. Part 4. It pushed me. After the red light and knock-knock, my parents were wary of this house. My mom was on the verge of a breakdown and not dealing with this well at all. Remember, she was in this house all day with this going on. My dad is usually more skeptical towards this kind of stuff, but he knew something was very wrong and thought my mom was totally justified in her feelings. Well, we fast forward a few weeks, maybe even a month. It's a normal night like any other. My parents are asleep in their room, my brother in his. In the middle of the night, my mom suspects 2 to 3 a.m., can't be certain being all drowsy. My parents wake up to a huge thud. Immediately, they jump up and hear my brother awake and calling for them. They rush into his room and find him lying in the very center of the room on the floor with his blanket perfectly taut and draped over him, as though he was tucked into bed, but on the ground at least 5 feet from his bed. My parents pick him up and ask him what happened. He points to the closet and says, "It pushed me, the fox pushed me." My dad opens the closet, rifles through everything looking for an animal, and of course finds nothing. So this is weird, right? Why would a 3-year-old say such a thing? Well, in that moment, my parents remembered the last name of the old man that sold them the house. Fox. Part 5, Reconciliation. I kid you not, my parents freaked out over this. There were too many things going on. My mom refused to let herself and my brother stay in the house, especially since she was now pregnant with my sister. My dad decided he was going to take care of this. Again, he is not a superstitious man. He is a doctor and a man of logic. However, he knew there was something going on with this house. A night or two after the fox incident, my dad sat down in the living room and had a talk with the spirit of the house. He said this, "I don't know if you are real. I do not know if you are Mrs. Fox, but I do know this. You are going to stop. We are a peaceful and loving family. If you are Mrs. Fox, your husband would be ashamed of you. He wanted us to have our family here because he knew you would want us to. Just as you raised your family here, I want to do the same. You may stay here as long as you like, but you cannot do this to us anymore. I'm sorry for your passing and for your pain, but you cannot take it out on us. My wife is pregnant, and you are causing her loads of stress. You even went after my son. This will stop, or I will seek out someone who will make it stop. Thank you, good night." After this, nothing bad happened to my family again. There were no lights, knocks, or foxes, but, and this is the craziest thing ever, there was one final thing. In a wooden cabinet that my mom bought at a neighborhood garage sale a few days after they moved into the house, there was a card, an anniversary card. It said, "Happy Anniversary." This was found 2 days after my parents' anniversary in June, after they moved the cabinet to the other side of the room. They had owned the cabinet since they moved into the house and had not seen the old man since they bought it either. My parents have moved many times over the years and lost the card inevitably. We still have the cabinet. It sits in our cabin to this day. Story 13. This was at the house we lived in for about 7 years. Many unusual things happened in that house. You could hear voices murmuring from time to time. I saw a shadow figure. Saw someone stick their head into the room once. None of it felt hostile, but the same couldn't be said for this pervasive feeling my mother and I both got if we went out front at night. She and I both felt like there was something watching, and it wasn't friendly. On this particular night, it was about midnight or so, and I felt like driving to the 24/7 grocery store since I wanted some snacks. As I stepped out the front door, I saw something out of the corner of my eye and turned to look. There was this very tall thing just floating, for lack of a better term. I'd almost describe it as hanging, but there was nothing holding it up, outside my brother's window. It was seemingly covered in a sheet that had once been white, but was extremely dirty, so it was more off-white, and got browner with mud and dirt the further down it went. There were no visible feet, nor eyes or face, but I could tell it was staring at my brother's window. As I stared at it, it turned to look at me, and I remember feeling like one of those butterfly specimens pinned to a board. It was as though its gaze was physically holding me in place. It felt like an eternity, but only a second or two passed, and it looked back at the window. The pressure lifted, and then it vanished. Right as it vanished, there was a fluttering of wings in the tree above, and one of our neighborhood's owls came to perch there. In a way, it felt like the owl came to my defense, as silly as that may sound. Our cul-de-sac loved the pair of owls. They were more like neighbors to us, so maybe it was just protective of a fellow neighbor. That's how I like to think of it anyway. In any event, I decided it might be best to just make some popcorn or something that night instead. Come to think of it, I don't think I ever told my brother about the thing. I probably should. Story 14. About 5 years and 2 boyfriends ago, I moved into an old farmhouse with my then significant other. He was a hoarder and was embarrassed about the state his house was in after his wife left him. He had an RV, and that's where he slept, because there was just clutter. Garbage, clothes, boxes, up to your knees in every room of the house. Me, being extremely distressed by mess, cleaned that house. Down to the cobwebby corners of the ceiling. It took me weeks, but I Murphy's oiled every inch of wood and filled his truck with over 10 loads of garbage. The very first night I was there, things were weird. At that point, I had only cleared part of the living room. The boyfriend snored unbearably loud, so I opted to sleep inside on the couch while he slept out in his camper. I had just had a fight with my mother and was lying awake around 4 a.m., fuming about it. I heard my boyfriend come in the back door, muttering to himself as usual. He was opening and closing drawers and cabinets in the kitchen. I figured he was searching for something. Finally, I got up because, well, I was already awake. Maybe I could help him find whatever it was. The kitchen was 5 feet from where I was, and when I walked in, there was no one there. I looked around and called for him, but he wasn't there. I don't get scared easily, and at this point, I was just curious where he had gone. I went out to the camper and could hear him snoring hard before I even got to the door. I shook him awake and asked gently what he had needed in the house. He said he hadn't left the camper all night. I thought, he was sleepwalking. When I went back inside, though, I noticed it had snowed lightly in the night, and the only tracks leading up to the camper were mine. A couple days later, I moved my 2 cats in. They were super on edge, lots of growling, acting out of character, especially in the middle of the night. I completely dismissed that, as it was a new, unfamiliar place. Obviously, they were uncomfortable. I had finally gotten the bedroom habitable, and they would not cross the threshold into it. The first night we slept in the bedroom was when I started to fear the house. The bed was up against a window that faced out to the cornfield, and my partner insisted on sleeping on the outside of the bed, leaving me pressed against the window. I got this horrible feeling. Something was right outside the window, and I was frantic to the point of tears. I kept telling him there was something out there, and he said I was being dramatic, which was frustrating because I'm just not. You spend your whole life being logical and calm, and when something strange happens, no one believes you. I slept on the couch. The next day, I noticed a handprint on the top of the bedroom window that I had just cleaned the day before. I held my hand up to it, and it was 3 times the size of my own hand, bigger than any person's handprint I've ever seen. It wasn't just a print, though. It was elongated as if the hand had dragged down the window. Still could be an explanation, even though I had cleaned that window the day before and would have noticed. Except the print was over 9 feet off the ground, directly over an open coal cellar. I showed my boyfriend and he told me something surprising. His ex-wife thought there was something wrong with the house too. She had been making dinner one day and he had just gotten home from work. Her back was turned to him and they had a full conversation. Then she looked out the kitchen window and saw him pull up in his truck. He still blew it off with me, just telling me I was paranoid and such. All this time, I assumed he was right, dismissed my instincts, and went about things normally. Then one morning in the spring, I got up to use the bathroom. It was 4:46 in the morning, and I knew the time because I checked my phone when I got up. The whole bedroom was light from the sunrise, and I quietly climbed back into bed. The house is all wood paneling, and because of my arachnophobia, I had the bed scooted about 5 inches away from the wall where our heads were. I laid down and tucked my arm up under the pillow, with my hand over the edge. The second I closed my eyes, an icy cold hand grabbed me by the wrist and yanked down. Hard. I bolted upright and in a state of complete terror, shook my boyfriend awake and asked if he was messing with me. He wasn't. I will never forget that grip because I had to struggle to get my hand back. I called my close friend and she said, "You know there's a cemetery within view of your bedroom, right?" I had forgotten, but being a practical person, it had never occurred to me that there might be a connection. She said, "Let's try something." Came over with a sagebrush, and we smudged the house. We were both laughing at ourselves as we did it. But the thing is, nothing weird happened after that. Well, except me falling into a hole in the floor. But I blame that on my own clumsiness. The relationship ended. I moved out, but we remain friends. He says nothing strange has happened since I left. Story 15. My high school used to be a giant mansion before it was converted into an orphanage and then a high school. One section of the school, the third floor, was inaccessible. The staircase which led to the floor was blocked off with wood and painted black to match the chorus room where it was located. In 2003, during the fall school show of Les Mis, they had to remove the wood so they could replace the windows on that third floor. We even ended up using some of the removed windows for our barricade. We had play practice most nights, and if you lived far enough away, usually you would just stay at the school and wait, rather than go home just to come right back up. While waiting for practice to start one night, myself and 3 friends, Ryan, Mike, and Michelle, decided to go up the staircase to check out the third floor. The staircase was rotted and falling apart from years of disuse, so we carefully went up one at a time to find an unremarkable hallway with some even less remarkable rooms off to the sides. All of this led into a big open area with old stacked desks and folders full of test papers from like the 80s or something. The 4 of us were a bit disappointed because the rumor was that this section of the school was not converted from the orphanage that occupied the space several decades earlier, and the ghosts of orphans still haunted the place. Since we didn't get spooked, we ended up just digging through the old papers. While Michelle was looking through the papers in a side room with her back to us, Ryan pushed Mike and me out of the room quietly and into an adjacent room to scare Michelle into thinking we disappeared. Sure enough, she came bolting out of the room, screaming at us, throwing out, "Forget you guys," and "This isn't funny." We had to muffle our mouths to keep from laughing when all of a sudden, one of the people in the room completely ruined the whole thing by giggling like a little girl. I turned to Ryan and Mike to see which one of them ruined the joke, but both of their hands were over their mouths and their eyes were wide as dinner plates. This room we were in, hiding behind the door, was small, maybe the size of a one-stall bathroom. Maybe that's what it was once upon a time. And somebody in this tiny room was giggling, and it was none of us. This whole plot played out in probably like 10 seconds between leaving Michelle and hearing the giggle. So we stood there staring at each other, waiting for something to happen that explained this. It was like 4 or 5 p.m., and we were the only ones in the chorus classroom the entire day. We would have seen someone go upstairs. We would have heard the stairs creaking as they went up there. Whoever giggled at us from inside that room was up there already. Unfortunately, we didn't get the explanation we needed because a second set of giggles started happening, this time with more than one person making them. That was it for Ryan, a big, tough, former athlete-turned-show kid who screamed the highest-pitched scream I've ever heard a guy that size make. It would have been funny if we weren't terrified. He pushed past us, ran screaming out into the hallway, scared the daylights out of Michelle on his way down, and we bolted down the steps. This time, we did not take them one by one, and actual chunks of rotted wood started falling off. We explained what happened to Michelle and then went somewhere that was not the chorus classroom until play practice started. The maintenance team must have known we were up there because we all collectively got a talking to about going up there. Safety concerns with the rotted steps. So of course people started going up there, willy-nilly hoping to see a ghost. There are more stories about that third floor during that year that promptly stopped once they replaced the windows and sealed the room back up. Now the school is closed and empty, so whatever ghosts were having a good time are now free to do so without the living getting in the way. Story 16. When my daughter was 7, she kept asking me why I was smoking in her room late at night. I was a smoker at the time, but I never smoked in her room. I never smoked upstairs at all. I told her that I certainly wasn't smoking in her room late at night, or at any time, but she was insistent that someone was coming in, sitting on her bed and smoking. I was kind of freaked out, but I knew nobody was sneaking into our house just to catch a late-night smoke in my daughter's bedroom. The house had belonged to the in-laws of my daughter's teacher at the time, so her teacher asked her how she liked the new house and her new room, and of course, my kid says, "It's great, but someone smokes in my room at night and Mom swears it's not her." So, on parent conference night, the teacher pulls me aside and asks which bedroom our daughter sleeps in. I tell her, and she says, "I don't know what you believe, and I don't want to offend you, but your kid says someone is sitting on her bed and she smells cigarette smoke late at night." I was getting ready for a deserved lecture on smoking around children, which I did not get. The teacher went on to tell me that her mother-in-law wasn't allowed to smoke due to health issues, and that she would sneak into what was now my daughter's room at night for a few quick drags. My daughter's bed was in the middle of her favorite clandestine smoking spot. We actually lived in harmony with Hazel the ghost for quite some time. She had an annoying habit of putting things back where she thought they belonged, but otherwise she was a fine ghost. She had said in life that she had no intentions of leaving her house, even after death. I did end up having a chat with her about her chosen smoking spot, though, and that stopped pretty quickly. Story 17. I know this isn't as creepy as the other stories here, but here it goes. I usually have to take the ferry to commute to university, and this time I had been studying for a while and had to take the nighttime ferry. I sat down on my phone when I noticed a strange man walking slowly back and forth on the ferry, eyeballing every passenger he walked past. The man looked to be in his 50s and had a gangster or mafia vibe. I even remember texting my friend and saying that there was a weird guy walking back and forth on the ferry. About 10 minutes before the ferry arrived, a man went out to the deck, most likely to get to his car. The mafia-looking guy quickly followed him outside. A minute or so later, I heard a scream from the outside, and it wasn't like any other scream. It was a proper scream of real fear from a grown man, lasting about 2 seconds. I looked around to see if any other passengers noticed it, but couldn't see anyone reacting. I was confused when I left the ferry and looked back just as I was walking away. I then spotted the strange man standing on the upper deck in the darkness, just watching all the passengers leave the ferry. His eyes met mine and I was horrified. It was almost like he knew that I suspected him. Needless to say, I rushed to my car, which was parked in the nearby lot. The worst part was that it was covered in ice that I had to scrape off before I could drive. On the way home, I was terrified and paranoid that he might be following me. It was seriously unnerving. I reported the incident to the police the next day, just in case something serious had happened. Story 18. The house I lived in from when I was about 13 until I was 24 had some darkness. I remember hearing stories from my parents that the son of the previous owner had passed away from an overdose, but not within the house, somewhere else. Still, that always creeped me out a bit. Throughout my entire time living there, I saw and heard all the classic signs of a haunted house. We had a glass cube wall, very 80s, that separated the living room from the dining room. And I saw all sorts of shadows running past on the other side in the dead of night when I would stay up watching movies or gaming. There was never anyone awake when I'd go look. One night when I was about 15 years old, I was sleeping in my room when all of a sudden I woke up. I used to have this HP laptop that would give off a blue light when closed, just dim enough to check the time from my wristwatch that was lying next to it. I don't know why I didn't have a regular nightstand clock. As I'm squinting to see the time, I hear something whisper my name right next to my ear. It was as if it was standing an inch from me. I jumped up out of bed and scrambled out of my room, knocking things over in the process. I didn't stick around to see what else I could hear. I ran to the living room and passed out on the couch until the next day. For the next few nights, I couldn't sleep well and kept waiting for it to speak again. It never did. The house came with a camera system installed, and I remember seeing all sorts of strange things. The back fence door opened on its own, even though it had 2 clip locks. Granted, they're the type of locks you only need to push up to unlock, so it could have been a strong win. But something about the movement of the door unnerved me. I can't explain it, it was just something I felt in my bones. I learned to live with that feeling during those years, but it was always there. I have a few other stories from other family members that require a little more backstory if anyone is interested. Story 19. This happened about 1 week ago. I set up an appointment to view an apartment in a part of town that's a bit less traveled. It's not a bad area, it's just kind of industrial and out of the way, so not much traffic around. I waited for about 30 minutes for the real estate agent to show up, but she never did, so I left because it was freezing. I made the first right turn out of the neighborhood and came to a red light about a block down. As I was pulling up to the red light, I saw what appeared to be a man and his child, a little boy, no more than 4 or 5, walking down the street heading toward a small cafe. However, the man stopped short of the cafe and instead went into the liquor store on the corner, without the little boy. I could now see the child more clearly as I came to a full stop at the light. He was holding a tiny green book in his hands, looked to be of Asian descent, had shoulder-length black hair that was blowing furiously in the wind, and he was crying. You know that face kids make when they're lost in a department store and can't find their parent quickly enough? That's what this kid was doing. At that moment, I saw another man walking toward the boy and rationalized that he must be the child's father, but the man passed the kid and kept walking. I watched the boy for about 10 more seconds as he walked up to the cafe window and peered inside, like he was trying to find someone. No one looked at him, and no one seemed to notice he was staring through the glass. He realized no one was paying attention to him and turned around to find me watching him. We locked eyes for about 5 seconds while he just stood there crying in a tiny blue windbreaker in 15-degree weather, clutching his little green book tightly to his chest. I decided in that moment, since no one was with him and his jacket was way too thin for the weather, that I would pull over as soon as the light turned green to wait with him until whoever he was looking for came back. Just then, an SUV pulled up next to me, causing us to lose eye contact, but I could still hear him crying. The light turned green not even 2 seconds later. I put on my hazards to pull over, the SUV zoomed off, and the little boy was gone. I quickly glanced into the cafe to see if he had run inside. Nothing. I looked in the liquor store. Nothing. He had just vanished, and I drove home in complete silence, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. Story 20. Growing up on an Indian reservation, almost everyone has a spooky story. I've had a few experiences, but nothing overtly scary. But one of the best ones I've ever heard was from one of my uncles when he was younger. He grew up on the Standing Rock Reservation, Fort Yates specifically. South of Fort Yates, on the South Dakota side, is a town called Mobridge. It's about 30 miles away, and when it's nice out, people from Fort Yates will walk that 30 miles to Mobridge for the bars and whatnot, usually catching a ride part way. It's an ugly little county road, and because alcoholism is so prevalent down there have been a lot of drunk driving deaths on that road. Anyway, one morning he's walking back from Mobridge after a night of drinking. It's like 6 in the morning, and he said he figured he had slept and was sober enough to walk back. He said he had been walking for about an hour or so when he came over a hill and saw a girl walking from the field to meet him on the road. He said she was native and dressed in regular jeans and such, but very pretty, so he figured she was just some girl walking down to Mobridge, or up to Fort Yates. So she meets up with him on the side of the road, and she starts talking to him. He said she was asking him if he was hungry, saying he looked tired, and that he should come with her to her home so he could eat and rest. He asked her where she lived because he didn't see a house, and she pointed to these trees about a mile away. He thought the trees probably blocked the house so he couldn't see it. He said she just about convinced him to go with her when he looked down and saw that her feet were backwards. He said he froze, stopped talking, and turned around to start walking back toward Mobridge. She was following him, telling him that he was going to die on that road and he should just come back to her home because it would be warm and that he could sleep with her. But he just ignored her and kept walking, not saying a word. He said she must have followed him for about 10 to 15 minutes before a car coming from Fort Yates stopped and picked him up. As he was getting in the car, she kept telling him not to get in because he was going to die in that car in an accident. When he got in and they started driving, he asked the people in the car if they heard what she said, but they told him he had been walking alone. In our culture, we have these beings whose name roughly translates to tree witch, and he was fully convinced that's what was talking to him that morning. Story 21. Freshman year at my university. We had a creepy old dorm on campus that no one was living in. Everyone generally avoided it because it just had an uncomfortable feeling when you got close to it, like you were being watched. There are rumored stories about it. 2 women dying there on separate occasions, one murder, one suicide, and they're the ones said to haunt the building. One night, a friend was in a bad mood because his girlfriend had broken up with him, so I was walking around campus with him to let him get it off his chest and just try to help him feel better. We walked past the dorm, and I brought it up about it being haunted and was telling him the stories to try and take his mind off things. So the way the bottom floor was set up, there were 2 doors on both sides of the building, and the hallway ran the entire length of the building. You could see the other door. We walked up to one of the windows and were just looking down the hall when 2 girls walked out of a room. They were wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 70s or 80s and stood there in the hall looking at each other, not speaking. Then one girl slowly turned her head and looked straight at us, then slowly turned her head back, turned around, and walked the opposite way down the hall. So we ran to the other side of the building, but we couldn't find them. We came back to the original door and watched them do the same thing all over again. We looked at each other and ran. This freaked me out for a while, especially afterward, when I was sleeping in my room and all my posters fell off the wall at the same time. After telling this story to another friend, he convinced me to go back with him and try to find a way in. We found an open window, which we later found out was the room the girl had taken her own life in, climbed in, and started walking down the hall. We wandered around the building a bit and just started to notice generally creepy things. Water faucets started coming on. We'd walk through one room and then back through, and a chair would be moved. On the first floor, a desk was turned upside down under the stairwell. As we were getting close to leaving, more water faucets came on, and the noise kept getting louder and louder. When we got back to the room to go back out through the window, and as we put our hands on the window, the door slammed closed. So we ripped the door open, dove out, and ran back to our dorm, and never went back. Story 22. In high school, my friends and I were messing around with a Ouija board one night. We had done it before, and nothing remarkable had ever happened. We usually did it to try and scare each other or our girlfriends. We all thought it was a joke. That night, there was no one else home except the 7 of us, and we were all together around the board. One of the girls there wanted to try it. She had never done it before. This time was different. The board misspelled some of the words the same way every time. It gave answers that seemed really historically accurate for our town, things we neither knew nor cared about. Long story short, the spirit claimed it was a 10-year-old boy who had died on the property in the 1800s and was buried there too in an unmarked grave. My friend's house was on a farm at the edge of town. We were all a little freaked out because the board had never been so detailed and consistent. However, we were still skeptical and assuming one of us was trying to scare the rest. Finally, my friend asked if the spirit could do something to prove he was there with us. It went to yes, and then spelled out Knock. Then the planchette stopped moving. We all just stared at it silently. And then there was a rap, rap, rap on the window right next to us. The lights were on outside, and there was absolutely no one out there. We never touched that board again. Story 23. We moved into an old 3-story house that was built at the turn of the century. From the deeds we saw, it was owned by a single woman for many years before being sold to a man, and then to us, my husband and my grandmother. It needed a lot of work, but luckily the next-door neighbor was a builder. He came in to do some repairs while my grandmother was visiting my parents in another city. On the final day, he said, "Your grandmother is always out working on the garden. It looks great." After I questioned him a bit, I realized he had been seeing a white-haired woman walking outside the back bedroom window in the garden. It was definitely not my grandmother. She was 100 miles away. I never told him because he's really superstitious and probably wouldn't have come back. In the same house, while we were eating dinner, I looked up and saw what looked like a huge black hooded figure hiding behind the doorframe into the hallway. It was so big it looked like it was ducking down and peering into the room before whipping up and away when I glanced over. That scared the life out of me, particularly as I only looked up because the dogs were whining. I never went into that corridor again when the lights were off. Story 24. My old childhood home has 3 stories with a cellar and is built in such a way that the floors are thin. Sound travels very well through it. The basement has a piano, which my brother, a musician, spent a lot of time on as a teenager. One morning I heard him playing and singing at the top of his very distinct voice. I yelled over the upstairs stairwell for him to shut up because he was being loud and obnoxious. Then I remembered. My brother wasn't home that day. He had gone out with my parents. The music stopped, and I investigated the basement to find it dark. For years, I was able to mostly brush this off as sound from outdoors or something I imagined. But this week, my brother and I are back home for the holidays. It happened again. Now the basement stairwell leads into a corridor, and off the corridor are 3 rooms. A full bathroom, a laundry room, and the rec room, which holds the piano. I was showering with the bathroom door open. I got out, brushed my teeth, and all the while I could hear my brother playing and singing from the rec room. Not an unusual occurrence, but the music did stop on its own at some point. So I finished what I was doing, put on my robe, and made my way back upstairs. My brother was standing in the kitchen. Now there was absolutely no way he could have gotten upstairs without having to walk past me. I asked him if he had been in the basement at all, and he was rather insistent that he hadn't been in the basement all day. I went back to check the cellar and found nothing amiss. Spooky, phantom music aside, the most unsettling part is that both times it has sounded exactly like my brother. Story 25. A little bit of exposition. When I was in high school, there was this old, dilapidated plantation-style mansion that had been completely abandoned for years. My friends and I would go out there from time to time to creep ourselves out. I probably went out there about 3 or 4 times over my high school years. We all called it the Austin House because it was near Austin, Florida. When I say that this place was creepy, I mean it was legitimately like something out of a nightmare. Firstly, it was way out in the middle of an almost primitive jungle swampy forest in Florida. Nighttime in places like that has a way of becoming almost otherworldly, with huge moss-covered live oaks completely blocking out the stars, thick undergrowth, and all the animal noises you hear. I have no idea who had lived there or how long it had been abandoned, but it had clearly been a long time. There were holes in the floor, dangerous staircases. It was probably not a safe place to be, and certainly not a place you'd want to just hang out by yourself. Inside the house were all sorts of disturbing symbols. Red-painted pentagrams, very well-drawn satanic goat imagery. Not really the kind of stuff you'd expect from just some bored kids. On the floors were candles and ritualistic symbols, and it looked like people had been performing occult rituals or something. So this one night, my friends and I were bored, and we decided to go out there again for fun. You could barely see the house through the woods from this terrible dirt road, and we started making our way toward it. The place was completely silent and pitch black, save for our flashlight beams. As we were getting nearer to the house, which had been in our view the entire time, we noticed that someone had placed a burning candle in the top window on the 3rd floor. We definitely would have noticed it while walking up, so someone must have been watching us and lit the candle when we got close to mess with us. The idea of some creepy cult members watching us in pitch black silence really freaked us out. I have no idea who it was, but we got out of there very quickly and never went back after that. Last I heard, the house had finally been demolished by the county a few years ago. Story 26. I was living in a house in Florida with 3 other guys. The house belonged to one friend, who I'll call Jason. He had lived there with his family as a child before they moved to California. He had moved back in with another friend, Carl, to attend college. Jason and Carl had been living in the house for about a year before I moved in, along with another friend, Mike. A few months before moving in, I flew to Florida to visit Jason and Carl. During that week-long visit, I noticed a few strange things: figures moving in the corner of my vision, small items being out of place. Nothing I couldn't explain or chalk up to my imagination. But after I officially moved in, things got weirder. A few days in, I set up an air mattress in my room. I filled it completely with a little battery-powered pump and screwed the cap on tightly. We all went out to grab food, and when we came back, the air mattress was completely deflated. The cap was removed. The thing was totally flat, like someone had sucked all the air out. Anyone who's used one of these knows how hard it is to roll up and get all the air out just to fit it back in the box. I kept noticing small things not being where I left them, and continued seeing shadowy figures in the corners of my vision. One in particular stood out: a featureless, child-sized shadow figure. I never saw it directly, only in reflections and at the edges of my sight. Another recurring thing I noticed: sometimes when I was using the bathroom, there'd be a soft knocking low on the bathroom door. After a few weeks, I finally brought up the knocking and the shadow figure to Jason and Carl. That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining things. They looked at each other with genuine fear and told me they'd been experiencing the exact same things. Jason admitted that he and his brother had also seen and heard these things when they were kids living in that house. Apparently, as children, Jason and his brother used to hear disembodied giggling in the room I was now sleeping in.